Acorn was formed in Little Rock, Arkansas, right at the same time Clinton was coming up through the ranks.
Acorn is about registering people to vote, encouraging people to get on welfare, encouraging people to cause trouble with their landlords and go on rent strikes in an effort to smash the system.
Acorn has always been subversive in nature.
Acorn follows the teachings of Saul Alinsky, the father of modern community organizing, and everything that he did was aimed at moving America even farther down the road towards radical socialism. The same people who supported the Weather Underground also supported Acorn, and these groups did a lot of the same things to push for more redistribution of income in our society. It's a largely African-American organization, but its leadership has always been dominated by white people, and very rarely do black people have any positions of real authority in the organization.
And welcome back to the special edition of Hannity. That was yet another clip from the upcoming movie District of Corruption. Joining me now, our Sirius XM Patriot host, David Webb, and former Acorn employee, Anita Moncrief, is with us. Good to see you guys. How are you?
Good, great to be here.
Appreciate you being. You took a lot of heat when you came out about Acorn and said some things.
Yes.
What's the status of that?
Well, right now, I think people are starting to realize that a lot of the things that I'm saying are true, especially with the Judicial Watch releasing all of these Freedom of Information Act requests. They get to see some of the things that are really going on inside the organization, and the fact that it's not dead, it hasn't gone anywhere, and they're still colluding and basically working with the Department of Justice.
Yeah, I didn't know this. You know, we've been friends a long time, David. I didn't know the extent to which you understood all about Acorn and have been investigating it for years as well.
The Acorn, and I started looking at them back in '98 in other versions because I was in Houston. There's a tie between Houston and New Orleans culturally. So in working in the 5th Ward in Houston, you saw what came out of the Acorn-like approaches, and this is one of the biggest failures. That's, of course, Sheila Jackson Lee's district. This started back in '75, really. Henry Royce Act, that gave the key line for the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act. It was introduced, it was passed. The legacy of Carter and the extreme far left agenda, which was to push this equal outcome, has led to this.
For those that don't, the Community Reinvestment Act basically allowed people that couldn't afford homes, it put pressures and forced banks and lending institutions to lower their standards under the belief that every American had the right to a home, whether or not they'd ever be able to pay back the mortgage or not.
Right, and this ties to the actions of not only this president, but those in his administration. Take over the banks, take over in this, go in and advocate and put pressure through Acorn-like tactics and get the banks to lend to people who couldn't afford it.
Make the connection to Alinsky, to Obama, to redistribution. In other words, his belief system, this is the foundation of who he is.
Absolutely. Look at the Alinsky-like tactic. What you do is you put pressure on the institutions.
Targeted, isolated.
Right. Then you have the legislators who back it up by insuring the loans. They have Freddie Mac that writes it. Fannie goes to the bank, says, we'll pay, don't worry, we'll back you up. Yeah. And you get taxpayer dollars being used. And this president, redistribution. The Warren courts didn't go far enough. His belief in reparations, and there's this black radicalism, which was applied only to acquire power, never to really help those people. Look at the slums in Chicago that are still slums. What has he really achieved? Sean, I always go to this. What's been the return on investment?
Nothing.
For all of these communities?
Is that, I mean, is this the foundation of who Obama is and this background?
Yes. Well, everything that Acorn did working with the CRA and giving away the bad loans, they used no-doc loans, they used under-the-table income, they used food stamps. They were setting the stage for...
Food stamps to buy a home?
Yes, as income.
Food stamps to buy a home?
Yes.
If it counted as income, they would find a way to put it in. It's about lowering the bar to join the program. If you lower the bar in anything, then anybody can get in, and that's where the massive fraud starts occurring.
What about, remember the Acorn videos?
Yes.
What does that tell us about Acorn as an organization?
There was a culture and climate of corruption. A lot of times when people came in, they were young and idealistic, but the longer you stayed there, you got to see everything that was going on, and people began to look the other way for the greater good. And what that led to was corruption at every level from the top down.
And the corruption being?
The corruption being, let's call it taxpayer-funded for one thing. The incentives that were given out to them.
Taxpayer-funded political
payoffs.
Helping one party win over another?
Right. Well, yeah, of course, to push the liberal agenda, because who promises you equal outcome? And how do they achieve that? Because it doesn't really exist. They give you a false notion that it does exist. And the colluders, or the collusion, if you will, the Al Sharptons, the Jesse Jacksons, this is in concert. This is not one person. This is an entire culture, to use Anita's words. And it is fostered by private sector collusion with government sector, but it's all liberal policies. And again, 40 years or plus since the Great Society. And since all these things have come into play, Sean, you're living third generation in the same slums, in the same projects. There's been no benefit to the American community.
No, it's her. Last word, Anita.
One of the things that people should realize right now that Acorn's agenda is Obama's agenda. They haven't gone anywhere, and Obama is pushing Acorn's agenda right now through the White House.
All right, guys. Thank you both for this incredible expose and your hard work. And still to come now, that President Obama and his team have been given another 4 years in Washington. Well, what does that mean for the cronyism, selling of access to power, rewarding political contributors? We're going to have a preview of the next 4 years as we continue.
Accountability to the people. In Washington today, we are governed by a permanent political class. American free market capitalism has increasingly become crony capitalism. There are political entrepreneurs. They don't actually have a good or a service to sell that people want, but what they can sell is access, information, taxpayer money, and they use the power of the state to enrich themselves and enrich their friends.
Sometimes even minute by minute, on the greatest news story of all time.
Well, traditionally, the media were supposed to police the government and the elected officials. What happened over the decades is they became their neighbors.
The candidate himself does a good deal of personal canvassing.
So they don't want to lose that access.
Transparency and light is the enemy of cronyism. And if cronyism has become a center point of American politics, they're going to do everything possible to make sure that the lights stay off and they can do what they want to do in the dark corners of American public life.
And welcome back. That was another clip from the film District of Corruption. Now, Washington has always been filled with people trading campaign cash for access to power, but it wasn't until about 4 years ago that an entirely new level of cronyism moved into town, and it's been called the Chicago Way.
The Obama administration really brought the Chicago way to Washington, D.C.
The Chicago political machine is an aggregation of about 35,000 people who make a living off politics.
You got to raise $200,000 per month for the next 4 months, you know? Okay? No, there's no, otherwise it ain't gonna happen. I agree, right? So don't let your family down.
In the Chicago way, you reward campaign supporters, bundlers, your political allies with jobs, with government grants, with government money. We've seen an explosion in that. 80% of Obama's major bundlers took jobs within the administration.
First Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, who was part of the Daley Machine. Then he went on to be mayor of Chicago. Then, who replaced Rahm Emanuel? Bill Daley, the brother of the mayor of Chicago, who that is the Daley Machine.
It has taken something that started a bit with Clinton, continued a bit more with Bush, and just raised it to an entirely new level.
And now that we've just given President Obama and his Chicago pals 4 more years in Washington, don't expect the corruption to go away anytime soon. Joining me now is author and columnist Jedediah Bila. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing great.
You know, I guess we've been governed by this political class. And now you got Solyndra, you got all this corruption. You know, you bundle money, you get access, you get taxpayer dough, and you can blow it.
Right, and don't forget that we're going to have a lot more of government picking winners and losers. If there's one thing that I learned from Barack Obama in the debates, is that he has no comprehension of the free market. He thinks it's the government's job to get out there, particularly when it comes to energy, and decide who should be succeeding and who shouldn't. And guess what? It's with our taxpayer money. Our taxpayer money is funding these things that in the free market ordinarily without that money would be failing. And guess what? These big Obama donors, well, they're getting their payoffs. Even if these businesses fail, they're getting their bonuses, they're getting their payoffs, and the American people are the ones who are suffering.
You know, but it's funny to me because even if you go to the auto bailout, I mean, what was Obama doing? Think about this. Was he not thinking about re-election, or does he really believe that picking winners and losers? Now think of, look, every small business that went bankrupt in the last 4 years, every person whose house is underwater or they lost their house, They didn't get a bailout.
Right.
But one industry does. Isn't that what you mean by winners and losers?
Yeah, and this was all about the campaign. Let's face it. He wanted to paint himself as an ally of the middle class, as an ally of the people who were Main Street as opposed to Wall Street, when in reality, these big donors, you look at George Kaiser when you deal with Solyndra, this is a guy who's a billionaire and an Obama donor who made out okay, despite the fact that that business went down and all of that taxpayer money went down the drain. Yeah. So he's not allying himself with regular Americans who are struggling as a result of his economic policies. He's allying himself with big donors who funnel their money right back into his campaign repeatedly.
What about this idea? The media wants access. Soon as they start asking tough questions, what happens? They're denied access. So they don't ask the tough questions. They don't do the follow-up work.
Well, they also don't ask the tough questions because then they'll have to hold the president accountable. And we've seen this on numerous domestic policy issues, national security issues. We see this with Benghazi now that's going on. They don't want to ask those questions because then they're going to have to report on the fact that the president had no answers, that the president didn't want to give details about the White House visitor logs and who's actually going into the White House to lay claim on this money that the Obama campaign is going to be distributing out via stimulus and whatnot. So that's why the media doesn't want to do it. They don't want to be reporters. They want to be allies of the administration.
But there comes a point where I don't know how an objective person, for all the demonization that Democrats and liberals do to conservatives and rich people and the wealthy, and they need to pay their fair share. You know, they need to pay more. Isn't it government that's similarly corrupt in as much as they take taxpayer dollars, they redistribute it, they create dependency, and they got a voting class to keep them in power? Why don't people see that corruption?
Well, I think that it's not articulated very well on the right, to be honest with you. I mean, I didn't hear Solyndra being talked about all that much during the during the campaign. I didn't hear issues like Fast and Furious. All of these issues that reflected a complete lack of transparency on the part of the Obama administration, I didn't hear that articulated so well. I heard Mitt Romney articulate a forward vision that was very different from Obama's, but I didn't hear him holding him accountable for all of the corruption and all of the deceit and all of the hiding things behind closed doors. Where are the Fast and Furious documents? We still don't have those. Who's been in the White House? We don't have any of this information. Why is that?
Well, I think that's a good point. Now the latest with Benghazi. I mean, you know, the same thing is happening there. It seems that a level of arrogance has kicked in, and frankly, why shouldn't it have? Yeah. Because they are not held accountable. So what happens? It's going to get worse.
I think the Obama administration really feels that they're above the law, that they don't have to be held to these standards because no one has complained thus far. You have a media that doesn't hold them accountable repeatedly. You had a Romney camp that didn't hold them accountable in full. So they feel like, why? I can't answer that for you. I think that Romney was very focused on a forward vision and felt that that would be enough. What he didn't realize is that you really had to expose all of the deceit and all of the failed promises of this administration to show people he said he was going to do this, but this is what he actually delivered, and make people feel it in their pockets. You want to talk about electricity costs and coal and all those? Talk about people's electrical bills and what they're going to look like. Make it real. Make it an everyday problem. And, you know, we're going to see more of this when it comes to energy.
Good to see you as always. Thank you for being with us. That is all the time we have left this evening, and thank you for being with us for this special edition of Hannity, and I hope you have